Welcome to the Psychedelic Mindscape, a podcast that delves into two fascinating topics: psychedelics and leadership. I'm your host, Victoria Lauren, and today I'm speaking with Murray Rodgers. Murray is a father, son, partner, and always evolving human. While he still performs active roles as chairman, CEO, board member, company founder, and professional geologist in the energy sector, he no longer believes that these roles, titles, and accomplishments are what define us as humans. His own multi year journey of self discovery, which includes several transformative experiences with ayahuasca, led to the deeper understanding that the true purpose of a leader is self knowledge, which is the source of true power. He is also the author of The Psychedelic CEO, an explorer's journey into psychedelics in a new era of business leadership, in which he redefines what it means to be a CEO: conscious, empathetic, and open. Welcome, Murray. I am so excited to have you on today.
Thank you, Victoria. I'm delighted to be here. It's great to be here with you today.
Well, I honestly can't imagine a better guest for this show, which is all focused on psychedelics and leadership. You bridge these two worlds so beautifully in the work that you do. And I'd love to just open with a bit more about you and kind of your background, where you started out in the energy sector and what that, transformative experience with that, sitting with ayahuasca for the first time. If you could tell me more about that.
Yeah, it's been a long and interesting journey. I'm a geologist by background, and have spent the bulk of my career in the oil and gas industry, exploring different parts of the world. And so I've always been an explorer by nature, and also been deeply interested in Mother Nature as a result, as most geologists are. I became more involved in the corporate life in the last couple of decades of my career, and that involved raising money and making money and creating value and dealing with boards and shareholders, and really just being focused on money and achievement, ego driven endpoints, really. And that took its toll on me. And so about 5 or 6 years ago, I kind of hit a wall because I realized that, I'd gone through a divorce. I was binge drinking. I was depressed. I'd kind of hit the end point of that whole trajectory of my career. And I thought, what had really this all been for, and what I really achieved? And maybe I was misdirected in what I was trying to find. Anyway, and it occurred to me that I was probably trying to find an aspect of myself through all those decades, uh, and by looking outward for those answers as opposed to inward. And so, at around that time where I had this cathartic moment on my 60th birthday, I was sitting alone in my house drinking a bottle of wine, thinking, this is really pathetic. Here I am at this stage of my life, and
Oh,
watching. And I found a movie to watch, but this was how things work. The movie was an old Hugh Grant movie called Rewrite. The Rewrite, where it was a guy that had messed up his life and had a transformation, went back to do some good. And I thought, well, this is a sign that something needs to change. And then shortly thereafter, I ran into an old friend in a coffee shop locally where I live. I hadn't seen her in a long time. And I said, what are you doing? And she said, well, I'm going to Rhythmia in Costa Rica to do ayahuasca. I said, that sounds really interesting because I've been reading about plant medicine for a long time, but it kind of terrifies me. I said, well, let me know how it goes. So she went. And when she came back, she sent me a one-line text, and all it said was, go. And so yeah. So I thought, well, I'd been to my GP, and he was going to prescribe antidepressants, and I took one pill, and I thought, oh man, I feel so terrible. I would rather, just stay the way I am than take that. So I thought, well, I'll go to Costa Rica and sign up at Rhythmia for a week, and see what that ayahuasca is all about. And so I did that. Ended up going down and staying for 2 weeks actually, and did 8 journeys during a 2 week period, which was a lot of medicine. And at that time, I met my current coaching and retreat partner, Johnny Messner, there. We became great friends, and he's now on staff at Rhythmia as well. But we, so my journey, started there. And when I came out of those 2 weeks, it was quite clear to me that psychedelics and plant medicine could be a very effective leadership development tool in terms of very elegantly and very quickly getting you to real points of self-discovery, and also encountering your primary wounding, which may have been your motivator all along in your career and leading you to be somewhat misguided. So, and the idea of writing the book came out of that experience. I thought this is something that's really worth, making a little more public. And so, I wrote the book, came up with the idea of the Psychedelic CEO because I realized that what CEO had meant to me as a business leader was it was all about cash, ego, and owning. That's what the old CEO definition was. How much cash do you have? You're the guy, and how much do you own? And after the ayahuasca experience, it was more like I thought there has to be a new definition for this. And I thought, well, consciousness comes out of it, empathy certainly comes out of it, and openness absolutely comes out of these experiences. So I thought, well, maybe that's what a new CEO really needs to embrace, as opposed to the old paradigm, which was paternalistic and materialistic, right? This comes more from the feminine perspective and more of being connected to nature and human beings as opposed to just achievement, money, and power. So I wrote the book, and then the book began to do its work as things tend to, and I began to encounter all kinds of fascinating people on this journey. I joined a board of one of the first psilocybin therapy companies in Canada. I was on that board for about a year and a half, where they were doing clinical trials with psilocybin with stage 4 cancer patients. And I learned a lot through that experience. I hosted a panel discussion at Queen's University during a conference on psychedelics and leadership. And I just began to gradually and slowly put myself into that space. I started hosting retreats with mushrooms here at my place in Black Diamond in Alberta as well, with business leaders, and so started to build that program up. And I have to say that psychedelics aren't the only tool to get to self-awareness and consciousness. Of course, there's breath work, and there's body work, and there's sound, there's music, there's many, many modalities that together can really create a powerful toolkit for business leaders. One of the things I found out too when I was writing the book, I thought, well, okay, I've had leadership development programs in my own companies, and they didn't really work that well. What do the experts say about it? That may just be biased by my own limitations. Well, the experts at Harvard, Stanford, and elsewhere around the world, when they would study leadership development programs, which is a multi-hundred-billion-dollar industry, their conclusion was always the same. They don't really work. And why? Because they don't create self-knowledge. They don't confront issues of power, ego, and deep wounding. And so I thought, no, this is a really good tool. And then in my retreats, we actually expose business leaders to other tools too that are non-psychedelic, as I mentioned. Body work and sound and breath work especially is incredibly important. And so today, with my two partners, Natalie Michael and Johnny Messner, we do leadership retreats in Costa Rica using ayahuasca, and usually with a group of about 12 business leader, CEO type people, usually equally balanced between men and women. And I do retreats here in Alberta as well.
That's incredible. I absolutely love just hearing about this arc of your journey and your 60th birthday. Hugh Grant coming through the television to say, "Hey, here's an opportunity for you to redo, reset."
That's exactly what it was, Victoria. It was a total
Oh.
rewrite. I mean, it was called the rewrite for a reason. It's like you need to rewrite your script.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, what I want to know, I mean, there's so many questions that have come to mind here. So let me start with when you are working with leaders, and this is an objection that I hear in, my own coaching practice. Some of what you were talking about was early wounding and how that can be kind of the source of motivation for a lot of people's career trajectories and what they're achieving in the world of business. And, I think that there are many examples of very egotistical leaders that whatever that wounding that is leading to that motivation, they are successful in terms of public image, maybe we'll say fame or infamy, money, materials, all of those things. And so I have some people that, they look at that and they're like, well, why would we want to change that? What's, if they're doing so well at producing and earning and stakeholders are happy, why would we want to shift that inner landscape for them? And I just love to hear from you, like, how would you handle an objection like that?
I've run into that many, many times. I run into it continually. In fact, the more work I've done on this, and I can use myself as an example, people that are constantly wanting more and to own more and to have more, and there's this idea of there's never enough. That does emanate from a deep, unfulfilled need of some sort. And what we're talking about here is helping people understand their own motivations, drives, traumas that they've experienced in their life, and how that affects how they are today. And when that self knowledge emerges and that healing occurs, then the people that have influence and have resources and actually have established power in society are then more able and more willing to do really good things with that, more constructive things. They stop seeking more for themselves and they say, well, what can I share? What can I create? How can I collaborate? One of the outcomes of doing this deep work, invariably, and this isn't just my, theory, it's quite widely known with all the clinical trial data, is that people become more connected to nature when they do this kind of work. Almost universally, they feel more a part of the planet. Okay, that can translate to some really positive behaviors when that awareness comes through. And so, and the idea of deep wounding can be very offensive and threatening to a lot of people, excuse me, pardon me, because we build up these structures, these ideas about ourselves, that I'm, I'll use myself as an example. I'm this, respected or successful CEO or geologist or whatever. And that becomes our identity. And we don't want anything to actually shatter that identity because it's the story we've built about ourselves. But underneath that, there's a whole other subtext or unconscious set of information that's percolating away. It's very threatening, though, to have that exposed. I have one example of an old friend, somebody I know very well, grew up with, very wealthy guy, and we were having a conversation a few years ago, and he had told me he had just bought a shared ownership in a jet, and and we're talking. He said, "Well, tell me about your book. What's your book about?" And I said, "Well, I've got this theory," and I was just describing the book. I said, "I've got this theory that the greater your desire to acquire more stuff, the deeper your childhood wounding." And he jumped out of his chair, grabbed me by the shirt, raised his fist, and said, "I am not wounded." And and I was not even talking about him. I was actually just describing the theory of my book. I had no judgment or anything about what he was doing in his life at all. And I thought, well, there you go. Um, you know, case in case in and it's not a bad thing. We all carry wounding. Every human being has primary wounds and traumas that we carry, and it's really just a matter of exploring oneself, having a broader sense of who we are and how we got to where we got to, and then maybe doing something more positive with it. There's nothing wrong with having financial success or nice things and that type of thing. That's fine. That also goes along with being excellent at something and being very good at something and working incredibly hard and being rewarded for it. But I'm just talking about the evolution of the human being in that context.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really appreciate that response because it is, yeah, I think that just based on, historically what we have rewarded and, kind of the image of the successful CEO that we've created, it's hard to break out of that mold. And I think that part of the threat with it is you had alluded to some, more of this feminine energy. And I see this whole idea of CEO as conscious, empathetic, and open as almost being a softer form of power rather than, it's like a power with as opposed to a power over.
Hmm. Yes, and what comes out of, well, ayahuasca is a feminine, plant, spirit, and what comes out of that is the sense that, as you just described, the feminine power is incredibly um, impactful in so many aspects of our life if we allow ourselves to feel what that is. And it's not passive, it's receptive, it's collaborative, it's full of connection and wisdom and beauty, actually, too. And it's a very powerful thing. But we tend to mix it up and think, especially with men, we say, well, if I have my feminine power, that means I've lost my masculinity. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this merging of energies within us so that we can function in the world as a whole person. And that has masculine components and feminine components working together. It's like a holy marriage of the spirit. The wound is really all about those two being separated by some sort of trauma, and then you live a divided internal life. So this work is all about merging those back together so that you're living a full integrated life. And that has masculine and feminine elements.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Well, I'm assuming that the leaders that you're working with, they probably don't come to you saying, Murray, I'm looking to merge these masculine and feminine elements and to heal my wounding. So if you could put it in their words, what types of challenges or, what's like the motivation for a business leader to come and, want to explore this type of executive retreat?
It's a fantastic question. There's this sense, and I see it all the time with people that reach a certain level of success, that something's missing. It's that simple. It's like, okay, I've got all this stuff, but I'm kind of miserable, or I've got these really bad habits, or, I feel my life is a mess, even though I have all of these objective symbols of success. And I'm curious about what that is. Now, when I do talk to, especially a lot of the male CEOs and leaders, the female CEOs are different because they tend to be very open, already open to the deeper levels of their being. That's a generalization, but this is based on my experience. The men, on the other hand, typically will do a lot of research ahead of time on psychedelics. They'll have read all the books and seen all the videos. They've got an idea of what it is because they're used to solving problems and having data and having the information. So they'll come to me with this preconceived idea of what it's going to be and what they want to have happen, because control is what drives us. These artificial personalities we develop are really based on controlling ourselves and controlling our story, and not letting anything in that makes us feel the least bit unstable. But a lot of the men will come in and say, well, I want to experience ego death. I've read about that. And that sounds cool. That's my intention. I'd like to experience ego death. And, or, I'd like to, I don't know, understand, how to do the next raise for my company and be a little more creative, make my people more creative, or make more money. There can be that too. An array of intentions, all of which are created by the left brain logical and, paternalistic way of thinking. And I'll say, you have to put all of that aside and think about surrender. And they'll go, oh, I've never surrendered to anything because that's not who I am. I don't quit. And I said, we're not talking about that. We're not talking about putting up the white flag and giving up. We're talking about surrendering control so that this experience and the plant medicine you're about to do is allowed to guide you where you need to go, not where you think you need to go. Because there's a whole other deeper path here for you that you're not aware of, but you need to give up the control in order for that to occur. And that's always a very interesting conversation. And so my integration talks with people have become quite simple. It's really all about surrender. And before you do that journey, spend some time with the idea of surrender. And what does that feel like to you? Initially, it feels like quitting, giving up, all those negative things. But beyond that, what if you just gave up control and realized there was a greater intelligence ready to emerge and show you something? I've got a perfect example of that. One guy, very successful, powerful guy, came to me and said, just that. I want to experience ego death. I think that'll be really cool. Well, he went through the experience and, in fact, cried the entire time. Had a complete and utter emotional reckoning, and what came out was his closet alcoholism and how that had impacted his relationship with his family and his people, his company, and he wasn't even aware that that was an issue for him. And so that's a very interesting set of polarities, right? I think I want to have ego death over here and have a really cool spiritual experience. Meanwhile, I'm a closet alcoholic and it's destroying my life. Well, the plant medicine took him there, and he came out of that a really, really different human being. And it's a beautiful thing, but we have to give up control for that to occur.
We do. We do. It's something that, I struggle with this, and in the ceremonial space, there's times when I find that when I go in with no expectations or the intention of being open, being receptive to whatever the medicine wants to show me, those journeys end up being so much more pleasant and just easier to integrate. But when I go into it with, I've got this goal, I've got this thing I want to tackle, I've got a question that I need an answer to, and then I start trying to control it because I've got all these expectations and desired outcomes. Those are the ones that don't go as smoothly for me. So that really resonates.
It's very true, and I mean that's really the point. The key to having a very, when I say positive experience, I mean it can be deeply emotional, and you can encounter trauma and wounds and heartbreaking things during the journey. But to have a positive outcome is surrendering control.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you're fighting it all the way, well, it'll be a harder experience for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm definitely someone that grew up. I'm the eldest of 6 kids. And so, grew up used to being the leader, being in charge, and historically, have used control as a form of creating, a sense of security and safety for myself. And I
Sure.
remember going to my first ayahuasca journey was in Ecuador, and I, I'd been invited by friends who had worked with these curanderos before, and I thought, great, they like them, they like the program. I'm gonna have a great time. So I go and I'm speaking with this woman before we walk into the ceremony together. And she's just kind of laughing to herself. And she says, I think it's just hilarious when control freaks come and sit with ayahuasca. It's just so fascinating what happens. And I went, oh no, I identify as a control freak. What's going to happen? So that journey was a rude awakening, in terms of just how incredibly powerful, plant medicine is.
Hmm. Yeah, it really is. That's funny because that's exactly what happens to us. I mean, we get the teaching that we need, and it's not always easy to confront it. But that the idea of another thing I often will tell people, because they'll say, "I'm really afraid to do this." And I say, "Well, that's giving up control. That's just all the fear. All that fear is you're afraid to give up the control and the story that you created about your life. But there's a much greater story that will emerge. So go with the fear, right? Breathe into the fear and let the fear be your guide. And I've found through all the ayahuasca I've done too, is when something fearful comes to you, that in fact is where the healing is. So if you just surrender to that, whatever that fearful image is or emotion, it transforms into love always.
Yeah. Yeah. That is beautiful. I mean, I'd love to hear just about your first ayahuasca journey and, sitting with it for the first time. If you're willing to share anything about the experience or, the insights that came out of it, because it sounded like it was a pretty, huge transformation for you.
Well, yeah, and I mean it was 8 journeys over a 2-week period, so it was a
Right.
progression, But I was absolutely terrified before the first one, for sure, and my first one was really kind of a life review. You read about this with near death experiences and so on, where you go through a life review. It was very much that. And I had to reckon with, so much of my own shitty behavior and who I'd hurt and who had hurt me and all of that, those stories that just percolated around in me for the decades, those all came to light in a very kind of clear and real way. So there's a lot of reckoning. And then it systematically went deeper and deeper into my relationship with my father and his father through the alcoholism that ran through my family. But the beautiful thing about the empathy that was created is I was put in their shoes to show, in my father and his father's shoes, to show what their reality was like. So I was shown life from their perspective. So a lot of the anger and resentment I had carried, say, towards my father and grandfather, actually converted to empathy and compassion because I was shown their reality, their pain, their wounding. That was ancestral wounding.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful. That is
Yeah.
powerful.
And
Yeah, there's
another
nothing
one,
like sitting Oh, I
go
was
ahead.
just gonna say there's nothing like sitting in someone else's shoes and,
Yeah.
looking at their life experience to generate that empathy, that compassion.
Yeah. So the idea of all these things were done to me, yeah, that was the story I carried. And that, in fact, was factually true. But the other thing is what was behind that was a great deal of pain and wounding, and unconscious behavior as well. And the other one that was profound for me was that when my mother was giving birth with me, we both nearly died because I'd gotten turned around in the birth canal and they had to pull me out with forceps. She nearly bled to death, but anyway, we recovered. But I had had a deep kind of pervasive sadness my entire life. I call it a low grade depression. It was never serious, but it was just a low grade feeling that I shouldn't be on this planet. And that stayed with me for decades and decades and decades. And what was revealed to me through one of my experiences was that voice of wanting to die was, in fact, my mother's voice because she was in so much pain. And I had internalized her desire to die because, she was bleeding to death. And I'd internalized that. And in fact, it wasn't my voice. And when that was reframed or recontextualized within me, I never had that low grade depression ever again, or that type of sadness ever again.
Yeah. It's amazing how that, new perspective or that shift in perception can really change your reality. It can
Mhm.
completely turn it around.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so then what it does in practical terms is you begin to live life differently, maybe a little more joyfully, maybe with a little less of the need to control and protect and hoard, because the idea to have more is to try to protect ourselves from these perceived risks, if something's going to get me, that type of thing.
Exactly. That's what I love to dive into with coaching is getting into those stories, those narratives of, this I'm in danger, I'm at risk, I need to protect myself. And it's like,
Mhm.
well, what's the belief behind that? Or what's the experience? Or it might not even have been your experience, right? It could have been your
Yeah.
parent or another relative's experience that
Yeah.
this is it's showing up in your body. It's, painting a story and your narrative, but something that, if you could release it or change it, then your entire world would change.
Yeah, exactly. And trauma takes many forms. We have our own personal trauma, things that have happened to us personally, but as you say, it can come through our ancestors, through our parents, and through even our surroundings. People, create a fearful mindset about something, and suddenly we internalize that, even though it has no real bearing on our reality. So, and there can be organizational trauma. So, a lot of corporations, in fact, you know, are traumatized by behaviors that they had perpetrated on the planet unwillingly, maybe, in terms of supply chain, plastics, waste, that toxic emissions, that type of thing. That's kind of a trauma that exists in corporations as well, if that's a historical aspect of the trauma. And it kind of pervades that system. So all of these systems on the planet have their own versions of trauma as well, our own internal system, our family system, our social system, and also corporate systems.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. Well, so I want to know more about for the individuals that, are going through the process. They're coming to you with this challenge of, something's missing. It's like I have everything, but something's missing, or maybe it's more goal oriented, results oriented for their company. But do you notice any kind of common threads or themes for what it is that the group is opening to? And I'd be curious to know, not just for all of the experiences that you've supported people through, but even group to group, do you find that there's like specific themes that will come up for a particular group of individuals?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the common themes is that outcomes that comes out of it is greater connection to others, to nature, to other aspects of of the planet, really. So a sense that we're all connected, we're all one, we're all really the same. Beneath our wounds and our traumas and our stories, we are all the same. That is a common thread that comes out, is that I'm not unique. And it's very, possible and desirable to share love, share vulnerability. There's a lot of power in that. I don't need to be protected. I don't need to be in a silo. There is a community of people that are all, moving into a higher level of being. And so there's a great sense of peace and hopefulness that comes out of that. It's generally relationship based. Most commonly, people's marriages, their partnerships, their parenting and relationship to their staff improves dramatically
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
ego-based story gets out of the way, however that has been created. And then there's this greater sense of kind of inclusiveness and relatability. That's the open part of CEO. It's like, it's not something to be ashamed of, to be vulnerable. You don't have to spill your guts to every person on the street. But the fact is to be a human being and expose, say, the journey you've had to get to where you get to, good, bad, and indifferent. That can be very helpful for the people around you. It gives everyone permission. And it's also called psychological safety, which is another research finding, is that as a leader, if you're open, to these deeper aspects of your own story, your people will feel safer to be themselves and more empowered to be themselves and who they really are.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
helps the
And that
company
can
grow.
have Right. I was gonna say that can have some real impact in terms of the business outcome as well. And
Great.
I saw this play out at a company that I used to work for, where there was a product that was going to be released to the market. And it was, the project review that we're going through. And of course, they want to hear we're on time, we're on target, we're on budget, everything's a green light, everything's a go. And it was a pretty intimidating setup where you would have, one individual representing the team or the project, the new product development, stand at the front of the room with all these executives, managers, room of 50 people. And if you presented something that they didn't like or that they questioned, all of a sudden it would turn into a bit of a courtroom, and it could be really, really uncomfortable. And I
Mhm.
saw, because of that fear of being called out for, not being on time, on target, people would sooner hide something that might have been, a block in the road because of not wanting to get singled out or called out. And I had the opportunity to deliver some really unfortunate news about some validation testing that had happened. And before going into it, I remember just, kind of coaching myself and getting ready for it, saying, I'm going to remain open, I'm going to remain curious, and I'm not going to take it personally. And
Mhm.
just having that mindset and then going in and delivering this bad news, that kept me in a really creative and innovative frame of mind so I could think through solutions rather than oh, I got to protect myself, I got to defend myself, which then, right, closes everything down.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a perfect example of what we're talking about. There is a lot of research out there that clearly demonstrates that companies that focus on the mental health and mental well-being of their people are far more profitable than those that are not. So that's one thing. The other thing is the $4 trillion a year wellness industry, only 2% of that money is spent on wellness programs corporately worldwide. Think about that. $4 trillion wellness industry, but in terms of corporate wellness, less than 2% is spent on corporate wellness. And yet, the people that are actually talking about corporate wellness are and what to invest in leadership development programs, that kind of thing, are the leaders, but they're the wounded leaders because they don't even know what wellness means. And that's the problem, is that most of the people in charge, in fact, I would say, have issues of wounding, and they're not aware of how important their own mental health is, then the truth of themselves, and then helping the people around them be, serving the people around them and helping them be better humans, how that directly leads to profitability.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
with
how do
openness,
you
yeah,
go
and the
ahead? Go
openness
ahead.
you're talking about is, or the lack of it is fear based, right? It's shame based. And in fact, when you do that deep work yourself, you can't hide from your own ugly truths, nor should you. And when you come out the other side, you're comfortable with the whole spectrum of your humanity and therefore comfortable with everyone else's.
Yes. Yes. And then that gives them permission, right, to really step into their authentic expression. And I find it interesting because a lot of people, they talk about authenticity, and what I think they actually mean is this beautiful golden shiny image of myself that I want to, project everywhere that I go. And it's like, no, authenticity includes all of those ugly, messy, undesirable parts of you that have a place at the table as well.
Hmm. Yeah, because there's this whole principle of spiritual bypass that occurs. People that do a lot of personal work, still many suffer from the fact that they don't want to deal with the ugly part or the dark part, and they put it aside, and that's a spiritual bypass, which means I've moved into this, adage I don't like, which is a better version of myself, without actually really incorporating the lesser versions of yourself honestly, and with integrity. Integrity really means the good and the bad together.
Exactly. Well, I'd love to know from your experience and perspective, how do we help corporations make that shift? If they're only investing, 2% into corporate wellness and it's being led by leaders that are wounded and unaware of their wounding, I mean, where do we even begin in terms of
We begin
organizational
we begin
wellness?
with the work I'm doing, with the work you're doing, Victoria. It's small pebbles into a vast ocean, and it's happening all over the world. There are people, wonderful leaders doing incredible things now in this realm, and it's only going to continue to expand. So it takes one person in an organization going through this change for that ripple effect to begin to be felt. And that's my mission, is just one small step at a time, one individual or one small cohort at a time. But there's so much power in that, because then they go out into the world and begin to build their own programs, their own ideas of what they can do in their sphere of influence. And that's something I talk about a lot, is what is your sphere of influence? It doesn't need to be taking on the world. It can be just changing your friendships, your relationships, maybe with your children or your partner, your friends, maybe some of your colleagues. That's your sphere of influence. Start there. And then
Yeah,
it takes care of itself. That's how it works.
I like that. I like that. That aligns with my whole game plan for saving the planet. You just start where you can, one step at a time, one person at a time. But
Right.
yeah, yeah, that is beautiful. Well, is there anything else, just thinking about the future and, kind of your vision and your hopes, either projects that you've got going on that you're excited about, or bigger picture, where you see our world moving to? I'd love to know what you see for the future.
Well, I see more and more business leaders being deeply curious about this kind of work, whether it's psychedelics or other types. And so more and more resources are being allocated, I see, around the world for retreat settings and programs and that type of thing. And it's not just business leaders, it's ex-military people, it's first responders. Gradually there's a groundswell of people in these different realms doing this kind of work to start to heal the trauma that exists in each of those realms. And for me, the psychedelic CEO will continue to kind of grow and expand a little bit as we refine what it is we're offering and the outcomes that we wish to achieve. So we're going to just continue to slowly build this program as we go along. We've got another one coming up at the end of October in Costa Rica. And, Natalie Michael and Johnny Messner, my partners, are fantastic people. Natalie's a world-class CEO coach out of Vancouver, and Johnny is a Hollywood actor and producer, but who's now full-time on staff at Rhythmia, has become a great healer, breathwork coach, and overall champion for psychedelic work. So it's a really unique team.
That's amazing. Well, where can people find you or your retreats? Where should I direct people to get in touch with you or learn more?
I'm just building a new website as we speak, but I can be found online. And we can, my email is I've got one macenergy@gmail.com right now. As I say, I'm rebuilding my whole website domain as we speak, so that'll take a little bit of time. And so you can find me, Murray Rodgers, the Psychedelic CEO. Google me.
Perfect. Perfect. I'll put some links in the show notes as well for folks so that they can find you, find your book, find your retreats more easily.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Marie, for taking the time and coming and having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it.
Victoria, it's been a real pleasure. It's been a lot of fun, and you're doing great things in the world. Thank you.
Thank you.